welcome to Energy Top Up. It is your weekly practical psychology and coaching webinar to give you tips for your personal and professional success. And this week, like the last 16 weeks, we are going to be looking at ways that you can take the most effective action. And our focus is on problem solving. I'm chartered psychologist Dr. Audrey Tang, and with me, as always, is the amazing award-winning parent and family coach, Sharon Morton.
Oh, thanks so much, Audrey, and welcome everybody. Now, there's a quote that says, if you wait for the moment when everything is ready, we'll never begin. And yeah, that is such a powerful quote, because certainly procrastination is the death of any opportunity and action. And when we overthink things, we can end up in what we might call paralysis of analysis. So if all of that sounds familiar, if you are prone to procrastination or thinking, well, I'll just wait until everything is right, then stay tuned, because this week is definitely for you. And just like every other week, it's all about supporting you to take action. Isn't that right, Audrey?
That is exactly right. And you are spot on when you talk about paralysis by analysis and overthinking. The worst part about overthinking is if our thinking is wrong in the first place. So not only are we overthinking and holding ourselves back from taking any action, but when we do take action, if we haven't really considered all of the possibilities and our mind is drawn and taken in lots of different directions by ineffective thought processes, it can cause us more problems. So for today's warm-up, what I want to talk about is some of the cognitive distortions, the thinking errors that we might have. A very quick example here is the mobile phone. Now, we all know we ought not to be having mobile phones whilst we're driving, and this is illegal, there's a fine attached to it. But some people do argue, well, if I'm not texting, if I'm just speaking to someone on the phone, surely it's no different to someone in the passenger seat who I'm talking with. Well, if you are holding the mobile phone, for example, and then something happens, you have to react and you drop your phone. For most people, the instinctive reaction is to try and pick it up. That is when accidents will happen. So we have to really consider, when we are making judgments, when we are making our decisions, when we're trying to solve our problems, all the different thought processes that there are around. So in the warm-up, I want to give you something very, very quick that a lot of scientists use, and this is looking for the null hypothesis. Now, what that means is if they're trying to prove something, what they tend to do is have an idea of what they expect to happen, but they try to disprove all of the various variables and various other outcomes that could occur. So how we can use this is, if you're trying to make a decision between A and B, it's really easy if you have a preference, say for A rather than B, to find all of the evidence that suits A and supports A and goes against B. And then we kid ourselves. We then say, oh no, I've done my research. Look at all of this evidence. But what scientists will say to you is look for the null. Try and find all the evidence against the preference, against A, and try and find all the evidence to support B. But then if you can argue against it, argue against that evidence, all of that evidence that says you mustn't choose A, and if you can then come up with a clear structure and clear idea as to why you still want to do it, then you have considered the wider range of possibilities in a much more effective and sensible manner. So on that, I'm going to pass you back to Sharon, and she's going to give us our first exercise.
Thanks so much, Audrey. Now I'm going to continue talking about challenging those errors in thinking. Now, have you ever stopped to consider what makes successful people successful, or what makes proactive people proactive? Well, let me tell you a little secret. It's all about the thoughts they focus on. Now, they still have negative thoughts. Of course they do. We all have negative thoughts, or what I call ant language. But what they've done is they've learned to challenge that type of thinking. They know that their reality is formed from the thoughts they spend most of their time focusing on. Now, let me give you a little example. If I said to you right now, don't think of a pink elephant with blue spots, chances are You've got a little picture in your head now of a pink elephant with blue spots, even though I said to you, don't think about it. And that's because I've brought your attention to that thing and you're having to think about it. And the way that the brain works is it creates that first and it says, oh, I've got to delete that. I'm not really meant to be thinking about it. So what is ant language? Well, ANTS stands for automatic negative thoughts. And just like those little insects, you know, one or two of them aren't a problem. But the problem is, as you well know, if you have an ant's nest in your garden, or maybe sort of coming up underneath the floor of your extension, all of a sudden we are consumed with trying to deal with those ants. If we think about our thoughts, one or two negative thoughts, you know, no big deal. Chances are all of us have negative thoughts at some stage. But when we don't reframe them, when we don't capture them, what happens is they tend to get bigger. And when we know with ants' nests that they're really destructive when they're en masse, we see paving stones that are pushed up. We see parts of tarmac that has splits in it. We see curbstones moved. And we think, how can a tiny little creature like that create so much destruction? And that's because they're working en masse. So if we use the same concept when it comes to our automatic negative thoughts, our thought ants, en masse, they're destructive. They march around our heads, creating doom and gloom and destruction. But how do we notice our negative thoughts? The first thing to do is to start to notice the quality of your thoughts. If you're using words in your thought processes or in your talking, like always, it's always me that gets it wrong. I'm always late. I'm never going to get the hang of this. I'm never going to get the job that I want. What we need to do then is, you know, we notice those little thoughts. They're little flags for me. That's a sort of an ant word. And then what we can start to do is we can challenge our thinking by asking ourselves, always? Am I always late? Is there never been a time when I was actually on time? Sometimes I am on time. So actually I'm not always late. Or never? Has there never been a time when I've learned something new? Where's my evidence? What else could it mean? So if we can recognize our thinking errors and challenge them, we can reframe them into becoming something much more helpful for us, rather than just listening to and creating our stories around our thoughts. Remember, thoughts aren't facts, they're just mental events. So let's focus on those mental events that help us to move forward, not the ones that keep us stuck. And so on that note, I'm going to pass back to Audrey.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to carry on talking about this idea of ants, the automatic negative thoughts, and give a visual as to how easily those ants can take us off our course. This exercise is called the Drunken Man, and it's by somebody called Carmichael. Now, what Carmichael challenges you to do is to think that there is a drunken man or woman or person who is crossing from A to B. You get to roll a dice 12 times, which will determine the direction that person moves. Now, if you roll an odd number, they will move upwards. If you roll an even number, they will move downwards. And what I always ask my classes to do is to predict how many times the person will actually touch the center line in those 12 rolls. Now, most people will tend to say 12 average, probably six times. And they may go a little bit more conservative and go with sort of 5 perhaps. When it comes to, if I say you're going to get 24 rolls, then people seem to think it'll be 12 and so on. You might be thinking this too. But in reality, when you actually start rolling the dice, what you don't tend to find is this very nice, even average pattern. So you don't necessarily, you start here and then get an odd number. So you go there and then get an even number and then get an odd number. And it doesn't happen like that. What does tend to happen is you might get an odd number, and then you might get another odd number, and then you might get a third odd number, and then you might get an even number, and another even number, but then you might get an odd number, and so on. And already, if that person has gone off course, it can be incredibly difficult to find their way back. And that is just a simple example of how our automatic thoughts or our thinking process, if it is not rooted in reality, but perhaps biased by, in this case, the law of averages, how it can take us off course. And therefore, it is so important when you're problem solving, when you're framing a problem, when you're trying to think of what to do, that you don't go with what you automatically think will happen. It may not be that somebody has got something against you personally. It may not be that somebody has got a character clash with somebody else. It may be something completely different. So be aware of all the possibilities and always try and start with the place of reality, not the assumption. So have a think about how to start from reality this week, and I'll pass you back to Sharon for exercise number 2.
Thanks, Audrey. Now, have you ever found that when you have a clearer idea of facts and a better understanding of how another person thinks, you can use it to move forward and grow? I certainly have. Now, I love to keep the DISC model of human behaviour in mind for this. And as a DISC practitioner and behaviour profilist, I love to use DISC to have a think about how it moves me forward and improves my relationships. Now, it really helps us to look at the way that somebody communicates, and it also helps us to understand how they act and realise that it's not personal. They're not doing things just to wind us up on purpose, or to be rude, or to wind us up. It's their personality behaviour and communication preferences. So that really helps us already to take a step back. Now, if you don't already know, DISC stands for the 4 different parts of our personality, and each of us will have our own blend of dominance, influence, supportiveness, and also that conscientious, sort of careful preferences in our personality. However, it's also helpful for us to remember that if a person has a different DISC preference to us, then their communication style will probably be very different. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. Let's take the D, the dominant preference, for example. Now, their communication style is going to be very direct. They're going to tell you exactly what they think. No frills here, no gift wrapping in their message. They'll just be delivering that message exactly the way that they see it. The I, the influencers, for example, well, they'll want to break down formal barriers. They'll want to be on first terms with you, sort of chummy terms even maybe. And believe me, they are the worst listeners, although they wouldn't ever admit it. The reason why is they don't want to listen. They want to talk. They want to have fun. They want to be the centre of attention. And believe me, they're prone to a little bit of exaggeration too. Now, what about the S style, the supportive preferences in their communication style? Well, as the I's, you're not going to get a word in. Our S styles, you're not going to get a word out. If they're upset with something that's happened, or maybe that what you've done, then they're not going to tell you. They're going to shut down. They're going to withdraw. They're going to internalize. And in their communication style, they're not going to get to the point, because they just want to make everybody happy and please everybody, make sure everybody is harmonious and on good terms. And our C, conscientious, careful styles, well, it's facts and details and details and facts when they're communicating with you. That's really all that matters. And they'll be very quick and straight to the point to point out if they see any flaws or failures in your plan. That's what's really important to them. And when you're communicating with that C-style preference, well, you better make sure you have all of your facts and figures in a row, because they will be able to spot if you don't. That's a very brief overview, but knowing these communication styles will really help you to understand that we communicate in the way that we like to be communicated with. And so if we understand what our own communication style is and our DISC blend, well, then we can start to remember that we can modify and manage our own communication style to adapt and get the best out of others too. And in knowing that and knowing those facts, we can move forward to the communication and to get the best out of any interaction. So try that out this week. Be mindful of that. And on that note, I'm going to pass back to Audrey.
Thank you, Sharon. And again, you've exemplified why it's so important to almost have those visuals, those ideas very clear in our mind. And I'm going to keep you with me, if that's all right, Sharon, because I want to do this next exercise, which is another visual approach. I'd like you to do this with me. One of the things that we don't do very easily is when we're trying to decide on what tasks to do, we tend to do what we like doing. And it just is as simple as that. So Sharon, I'm going to ask you to think about 3 tasks that you might have. A task you like, a task you need to do for a client, and a task that takes time to do. But I want you to rate them as the amount of effort you need to put into each task and the importance of that particular task. So effort out of 10 and importance out of 10. Task you like, task you need to do for a client, and a task that takes time.
Okay.
So whenever you're ready, just let me know what your ratings would be.
Okay, right. So a task I love, probably not important. So which way round is it? So is it high?
If it's not important, then it would be low. Sorry, yes, I didn't explain that.
Okay, no, that's fine. So so it's not important. So probably a 2 or a 3.
Yeah.
And the amount of effort that I put into it, the scale is the same, I guess, is it? So, you know, if it's not a lot of effort, then yeah. So I don't have to put a lot of effort into it. So again, probably a 2 or a 3.
2 or 3. Okay, no problem.
So
then you've got the task to do for the client.
Okay, so task for the client. So the amount of effort, I guess, a 7 or an 8, because I want to make sure that it's absolutely right. So put a lot of effort into it. And what was the second question again?
The importance of the task that you
need
to
the
do
importance.
For that client.
Right. Okay. So that would be a 9 or a 10 if it was for a client.
Yeah. Okay. So let's put it sort of an 8 and a 9 there. And then your task that takes time. It may or may not be an important task, but it takes time.
Okay. So the amount of effort I put into it. Something I don't like doing was this. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So the amount of effort I put into it, probably really low. Again, a 1. If I don't like doing it, I can't. You know, it's like. And the importance. Well, I guess it depends on what it is, because sometimes there are things that I don't like doing that are important.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So let me think about something that's important that I don't like doing. So, yeah. So it could be really important, so it would be a 9, but I wouldn't put much effort into it.
Yes. That's a really common way of looking at tasks, and that's how I do this exactly the same way. But without this visual, without really thinking about each of these points, it becomes quite confusing as to know what to do first. The reason I say that is we often choose the task we like to do first. It makes sense. We like it, we want to do it, we're motivated. But if you actually give yourself this visual, so you've got the task you like, which gives you a total of 4, you've got the task you need to do and for the client, and that gives you a total of 17. And then the next one gives you a total of 10, the task that takes time. You can actually see which order you need to start doing those tasks. The task you need to do for the client is 17. That needs to be done first. But actually, the task that takes time is a 10. And even if you don't like doing it, it's that important. It's more important than a 4. So therefore, as much as we may not like it, that is the more sensible one to do next.
Or Audrey, and I would definitely be doing the number 4 first if I hadn't have had that visual, for sure.
Same, I would as well. And that's the same thing with your DISC model. I would always be prejudging somebody without actually thinking, actually, what are their positives as well? And I think this is why it's just so important that we look at all those possibilities. This example is really similar to something called the decision tree. And the decision tree is used by Elon Musk, amongst other leaders. And what this decision tree is a similar visual. You times the probability of a winning outcome by the value of the win, but then you minus the probability of a losing outcome times multiplied by the cost of the loss. And you do that for each of the solutions on those branches on that tree that you have for a problem, and then you choose the one that comes out with the best answer. So using visuals can really make a difference. Now, when it comes to problem solving, we need to start this young. And one of the things that we do to do this with children is that we give them little fun activities and little fun tasks in order to get used to solving problems on their own and trying it perhaps without asking for help. Now, we've got a very special guest in the Homeschool today, and this is Sarah Whalley and Isobel. And they have demonstrated an obstacle course which you can set up at home, which takes your child through a number of different types of activities, engaging physical, engaging mental, coordination, dexterity, and so on. And to add a little bit of fun to it, you can even time them. So over to Sarah and Isobel.
Hello.
Hello.
Today we've set up an obstacle course in our house with lots of different toys and objects that you can find around the house. And we're going to time ourselves and see if we can get faster and faster as we practice. Let's have a go. On your marks, get set, go. Job.
Did you say we have to do a puzzle?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm doing a puzzle.
Okay, then ring the bell. And stop. Good job. Shall we see how fast you are?
Yeah.
Do you reckon you can do it faster?
Yeah.
Shall we have another go?
Yeah.
Okay, ready? Steady.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Isobel. Problems can be solved so easily if we get into early practices. Now, we love hearing from you because we love it when you use our tips and ideas and maybe even adapt them. And I know that Sharon has heard something from one of you guys to tell us how well you've been using one of our tasks. Back to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Audrey. As Audrey said, we love hearing when you've been using these tips and strategies effectively. Now, we heard from a viewer, Dave. Thanks so much for messaging us in. In Dave's company, they've been using the urgent and important grid that I shared with you a couple of episodes ago. And he was sharing that they're using it in the workplace with very effective results alongside post-it notes. So the post-it notes have had the different tasks on them and posting them in the grid depending on whereabouts they were, where they fell within that grid. So it's been fantastic to hear that. Great feedback. Thanks so much, Dave. Continue to let us know how it's going back in your workplace. And if you have any feedback from the tips and ideas that you have shared with us at any stage throughout the show, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. Now, I'm going to finish today my segment on my top tips in my coaching toolbox. And this week, it's all around top tips for avoiding that overthinking. So, tip number 1, perspective is everything. Getting things into perspective is my key tip. One way to do this is to ask yourself, will this really matter in 5 years' time, or even in 5 months' time? Asking this question really helps us to get in perspective what is actually going on. Tip number 2, take one small step every day. Make sure you focus on getting one small step done every day. When we avoid overthinking something as to why we're not taking action, then we can really start to move forward. So ask yourself, what small thing can I do today that will move me one step closer to my goal? Tip number 3, become a detective. Listen out and recognize those automatic negative thoughts, that ant language. And when you hear the shoulds, the musts, the oughts, the always, the nevers, tell yourself to stop. Ask yourself, what else could this situation mean? Where's my evidence that it is actually true? So there are my top 3 tips to avoid overthinking. Give those a try. Thanks so much. And on that note, I'm going to pass back to Audrey.
Thanks, Sharon. And that does bring us to the end of the show. So do reflect on all of the things we've taught you. Do go back to look at all the activities and exercises, and do drop us a line if you want to tell us how you've been doing, or even ask us individually to give you extra exercises or more things to do. But before Sharon and I go, we do, of course, have a lovely reflection from Reverend Mandy Marriott of the Duston Parish. And this week, she's going to be talking about how sometimes not thinking at all and simply stopping and pausing can actually allow a solution to present itself. So from Sharon and myself, remember, do not be the most enlightened person who never lived. Think about things, but always take action. Bye for now.
Bye.
Hello again. I wonder, do you ever wake up in a morning and wonder how you are going to get through the day because there are just so many things on your to-do list? Or are you perhaps wrestling with a problem and you don't know which way to turn? You just don't know what to do next. Well, you know, if you are in those situations, there's some excellent advice in the Bible from St. Paul as he wrote to believers in Philippi. This is what he said: "Do not worry about anything, but pray and ask God for everything you need, always giving thanks." Not surprisingly, I am a great believer in prayer. I often find if I pray at the beginning of a very busy day, somehow God stretches out the time and I manage to fit in all those things that I was worrying about. But you know, when I don't pray, I very often get in a terrible mess. I love this quote from American writer Max Lucado. He says, "Prayer pushes us through life's slumps, propels us over the humps, and pulls us out of the dumps. Prayer is the oomph we need to get the answers we seek." Now, of course, there's no right or wrong way to pray. Pray as you are able. I do believe in a God who loves us passionately and is there in the very midst of our lives. And so a final word of encouragement today by way of a story. And the writer relates an incident which stayed with him. This is what he remembers. I hired a plumber to help me restore an old farmhouse. And after he'd just finished a really rough day on the job, he'd had a flat tyre which made him lose an hour of work, his electric drill quit, and then his ancient 1-ton truck refused to start. And as I drove him home, he sat in stony silence. On arriving at his home, he invited me in to meet his family. As we walked towards the front door, he paused briefly at a small tree and touched the tips of the branches with both hands. Upon opening the door of his home, he'd undergone an amazing transformation. His tanned face was wreathed in smiles, and he hugged his small children and gave his wife a kiss. Afterwards, he walked me to the car. We passed the tree, and my curiosity got the better of me. I asked him about what I'd seen him do to the tree before he entered his home. "Oh, that's my trouble tree," he said. "I know I can't help having troubles on the job, but one thing's for sure, those troubles don't belong in the house with me and my family. So I just hang them up on the tree every night before I go into the house, and I ask God to take care of them. Then in the morning, I pick them up again. Funny thing is," he smiled, "when I come out in the morning to pick them up again, there aren't nearly as many as I remember hanging up there the night before." I wonder, do you have a trouble tree, a worry tree, somewhere where you can hang up your troubles, somewhere where you can hand them over to God? You never know, when you hand the burden over, the day can become much brighter and lighter. See you again soon. Bye for now.